All right, guys. So I thought that I would watch another Maplestory video and sort of talk a little bit more about it. The Lazy Pion made one about a year ago. I think people are really sort of conversating about this game a lot more recently, and it's a game that I have a ton of hours in, and I just thought that I would sort of make a little bit of content about it. So let's talk about it.
Maplestory is probably one of the most comfy MMORPGs I can think of. Boot it
I would
up,
agree with
hear
that.
that relaxing, nostalgic music kick in, and get transported back to the mid-2000s during the glory days of MMOs when life was simpler, games felt more magical,
classic.
and we didn't have such a min-max culture where everyone knew everything as soon as a new update was released. People often laud games like World of Warcraft and RuneScape for being around so long, but another old-school MMO that's sometimes overlooked in this regard is the king of 2D MMO sites.
There is a lot of the problems that we have with video games nowadays that I think comes down to the players for sure. And that's something that we really don't talk about a whole lot is everyone's personal responsibility in video game culture and the way that all of that works out, because it's not a very fun topic to talk about, and nobody wants to own up and take any responsibility for the way that they personally play video games. But definitely the min-maxing culture that goes on inside of all of these games is a huge turnoff to a lot of people. And if you want to play that way, and I enjoy playing that way sometimes because I like to have big numbers on the damage boards as well, that's totally fine. But we definitely need to take a look at the way that we're actually going into these experiences and think about them as being video games instead of as being these places to get clout and respect and to have a dominance hierarchy going. I know that they're sort of a substitute for a lot of people's real life, and finding ways to be powerful inside of a game is a substitute for finding ways to be powerful in the real world. So I don't want to knock it too much, but it's definitely something that I think we need to think about more.
Scrollers, Maplestory, which as of 2023 will be approaching its 20th anniversary.
Yeah.
Maplestory had a massive impact on not just the MMORPG genre over the years, but gaming as a whole due to it being the first online game to popularize the free-to-play business model at a time when every MMO was subscription-based. The first time I personally heard of Maplestory was through a fan-made Maplestory music video of Linkin Park's Numb Techno remix. Yeah, those were the days. In this video...
Bro, honestly, we can go back. This is the thing that I always tell people about Maplestory. One of the reasons that I got so into that game whenever I was a kid was because of XX Dre XX. I don't know if you guys remember him. I know we're sort of jumping off topic a little bit here, but XX Dre XXX was this guy who was making all these videos that were I don't want to play too much of this video actually because it has real music in it and I'll get demonetized. But he was making a whole bunch of Maplestory videos back in the day. Dude, is this even his account anymore? He might have lost his account. Oh, Dre86, that's what he was called. But he made a whole bunch of Maplestory videos back in the day, and he made all these different animations with them and everything that had storyline and plot and all of this, and he really popularized a lot of the people who were actually playing inside of Maplestory. So people like Tiger, people like Fangblade, all of these, all of these people that we knew the names of back then, and were the heroes of the world. The Zezima of Maplestory to a degree is the people that he was sort of talking with and he was friends with. He played on Scania, which was the popular server back then. And he just put in a lot of work to really popularize this game, and I think he did a big amount of the drawing new people in. I mean, some of his videos, this one has 2 million views on it, dude. This one has 1.3 million views. He really, he was a guild leader. He had all these things going on, and he really made you want to play this game, and that's something that made Maplestory pop off.
We're going to take a trip down memory lane to talk about the long history of Maplestory, the epic moments, the unique features, its 19 years worth of content updates, as well as the current state of the game and why even after all this time, people are still playing and enjoying this nostalgic MMO. This video is sponsored by Maplestory, so if you're feeling cute and nostalgic after this video and want to revisit Maple World, then click the link in the description below.
Good for them, dude. They should be sponsoring more people. Nexon has this bad habit of sponsoring people and then asking them to only say good things about the game, and I think that's a really terrible thing because there are a lot of negatives about the game. You need to give people a fair idea of what it's actually going to be like when they go into it, and Maplestory is just one of those places that you really need to know what the game is before you do it, because it's not going to be your typical MMO experience. It is a grind fest. It's a Korean MMO, so it's going to be a grind fest no matter what. It's more akin to something more modern like Black Desert Online, that kind of thing, where the whole point of the game is to get better at grinding over time and to farm and do all those things. in years.
Maplestory
Indeed.
during its launch years was a completely different game
So
compared
slow,
to what
dude.
it is now. It only had the 4 vanilla class archetypes being the warrior, archer, thief, and mage. Only Victoria Island and Orbis existed in terms
Dude,
of exploration.
Orbis was so good.
Progression was challenging, and leveling up even once felt like a big accomplishment. Veterans of the game can probably remember back when it took a week for you to level from 1 to 30 so you could get your second job advancement.
Yeah, and a week of really hard playtime too. Leveling from 1 to 10 took me about, I don't know, 6-7 hours or something, especially because you didn't really have a whole lot of potions back then, so you were a lot of times sitting around or standing around. We didn't even have chairs when Maplestory first came out. So you were just standing around waiting for your health and your MP to go back up. It was really nuts. And also you didn't get a skill reset whenever you first did your first job advancement back then. So you or a stat reset, so you had to build your stats from the get-go. So for a class like wizard or mage, if you were going to do magician as your first job advancement, you had to put stats into intelligence instead of into strength. So you did like no damage to monsters. So you were just grinding on snails.
Or how much of a struggle that second job advancement quest could actually be.
For real.
One of the worst feelings back in the early days was getting to level 30, choosing your second job, and you not enjoying how it felt to play.
Totally.
If that happened, it was back to character creation just to
You had
spend
to
another
roll your stats. I forgot about that. What a classic,
hour
dude.
or two trying to roll for perfect stats. It didn't bother you too much though, because you loved the game and the experiences it gave. Party questing in Maplestory was where friends were made, lifelong friends in some cases. You'd spend days, maybe even weeks, grinding the same dungeon over and over with the same people. It was hard not to fill up your friends list.
This was fun. So you had a bunch of people. So party quests were basically dungeons that you did inside of Maplestory, where you would get a party together, and each server, each world could only have one party quest active at a time. So you would switch between the channels, trying to find a party quest, and you would send people out all over them. And then whenever someone found a free one, you would be like, "Oh, this one's free. Come here." So then you'd all go there. You'd go into the party quest. And this part of this dungeon, there were all these like 6 different barrels. And you had to get on 3 different ones, and one person had to click the person to see if they were correct. So you were trying to figure out what the correct combination was.
After running Kerning City PQ or Ludi PQ.
Yeah, Ludi PQ was
tracking
classic.
players to get into party quests, shouting on channel 1 to find people to join your group, all for that sweet, juicy XP. Eventually, once you were strong enough, you'd fight against the giant epic bosses that were introduced to the game.
I never got to those, dude. I don't know who he's talking about when you were strong enough. There were definitely people who did make it there, but they were so far and few between.
Zachem, Pianus, Papulatus, and Pinkbean, to name a few. And they all had a sense of mystery and awe about
Papulatus,
them.
dude,
Maybe
yeah.
you spent a night or two watching players from across the globe fight one of these epic battles on YouTube. After all, Twitch and live streaming didn't exist yet, so the only way to watch someone was through a grainy 360p video, 480p if you were lucky. If you weren't grinding though, you were hanging out with friends in the free market, spamming for items you wanted to buy or sell, loading up your chat bubble with tons of @signs just so you could be seen. Maybe you went to one of the lower channels and hung out in a random free market room with your guildmates, just talking to the early hours of the morning.
Dude, yeah.
Maybe you even became a hennaho, which is someone that would basically play the game only to chat and dress up their character in different outfits. Whatever it was the game had to offer though, so many people fell in love with it. The golden age of Maplestory.
Totally.
The early years of Maplestory captured such a wide audience with its unique appeal. It didn't
It
matter
had like 4 million players at one point.
who you were, what you identified as, casual or hardcore gamer, someone who was shy or outgoing, or someone that was young or old. Maplestory had something for everyone.
Totally.
Because of that, Maplestory was the online hangout. At the time, its competitors were World of Warcraft, EverQuest, RuneScape, and a few other titles. Games that had a completely different audience than what Maplestory had captured.
He glossed over a few other titles, but honestly, back then the MMO landscape was a lot more rich than what it was or what it is now. And a lot of these games weren't very good. I mean, I remember ones like Eternal Lands or Endless Online or Lattale, all those kinds of games that people played back then that had sort of a different kind of culture to them, that were less so about actually advancing in the game and more so about being these virtual hangouts with things to do within them. And like I said, it was just a lot more varied. I would say that your options as far as what to play in an MMO nowadays is much, much, much more reduced than what it was back then, which is such an odd thing to think of because we've made it so far inside of the creation of video games. But honestly, like, we just don't have the options that we used to.
captured. Instead of knights and swords, it was mushrooms and forks on a stick.
Yeah.
People didn't seem to worry so much about endgame back then like they do nowadays.
It was so
in other
hard.
Games. Instead, it seemed like everyone just wanted
It was one of those MMOs where every time you died, you lost experience points. And it took you a really long time to gain experience. I mean, getting from level 35 to 36 was like, for me at least, a multi-hour grind of real dedication and focus, and took a lot of time. And there were easier ways to do things. I mean, doing Monster Carnival and all of that back in the day, which was a mini game where you were competing against another team, and you guys could you earned points inside of the mini game, and then you spent the points to like drop more monsters on the other people and try to kill them and set them back and all of these things. And you were trying to achieve goals, and that was an easier way to get levels, but it still was really difficult. Each one of those matches took a half hour plus to do, and it was just a whole different thing.
To make friends, it was more about the social experiences you could find in addition to its ease of access for all players. Totally. It wasn't an overly difficult game, meaning anyone could play it and enjoy it. And the best part, it also had content for the hardcore crowd to enjoy who wanted that kind of experience too.
Totally.
Any veteran of Maplestory knows that it took a lot of patience and grinding to get to a high level. All the high level areas and content were only experienced by the hardcore players.
Yeah.
If you got to level 70 in the game's early years, you were respected.
Yeah.
New players.
Third job was such a big deal too, because a lot of classes didn't actually get a whole lot of skills during their second job. So I played a magician, which was probably the best class for actually getting a lot of different skills whenever you got to your second job. And I played an Ice and Lightning in particular because they had mobbing, so that meant that your actual ability to grind enemies was much, much higher. But you didn't even get mobbing until you were in your your 50th level or so, because you started off by getting Ice Beam, which was a much more powerful single target attack and took you through a lot more of the early leveling stages. So much of this game was just really, really slow grinding. I mean, Thieves didn't really get a whole lot of better skills unless you played the Dagger Thief, the Assassin, it was the other one, Bandit. Like, that was probably the best one to actually get for damage in your second job, and Warriors didn't get anything except for buffs in their second job. It was really crazy, dude.
Would see all the abilities and how powerful you'd become, which drove those new players to want to continue playing, resulting in fresh bloods to that hardcore community. The game had an amazing sense of community building within it, which bridged the gap between casual and hardcore, which is something that you don't see too much of anymore. As time passed, Maplestory kept adding more and more content for players to sink their teeth into and form new memories. New classes, new bosses, dungeons, quests, zones to explore, as well as cute random in-game events. A lot of what made people fall in love with Maplestory back in the day is still felt within the game even today, hence why people are still playing it in 2022. It's easy to see how Maplestory stands out from its competitors at a glance. It's a 2D platforming MMORPG, so its gameplay is already unique, with most MMOs being 3D third person. Maplestory is also one of the few games that embraces real-life locations in their worlds, such as having areas based on South Korea, America, China, or Japan, for example. Maplestory also does a fantastic job of rewarding players for playing alt characters. Obviously, with there being over 40 classes, at some point you're going to want to give others a try. The game gives you so many rewards for doing so in the form of progression, cosmetics, new abilities, and more.
100%.
Maplestory isn't all about the grind either. It sports some of the best socialization in the genre. It's easy to relax with whilst chatting with new friends. There's a plethora of mini games on offer and plenty of fun events to break up the...
Maplestory is sort of like Hollow Knight meets World of Warcraft meets Neopets meets Adventure Quest in my mind. That's the kind of game that Maplestory is. I don't believe that it's meant to be taken really, really seriously, although there are tons of people who do that. And props to them, because this game would wear away on your soul. I mean, star forcing is a thing that you do to your equipment to try to increase the level of your equipment that you're using. And the best equipment in the game can go up to over level 20 star force. And every single time that you star force, you have a percentage chance. Well, not every single time. Once you get a certain level, you have a percentage chance of that item being destroyed. So the more you Star Force and the further you get, the higher that percentage chance gets. And people spend huge, massive billions cash stacks in order to try to get their items up higher and higher in Star Force, only to have them be lost. I mean, it is nuts, dude. The end game of Maplestory doesn't appeal to me as much as the actual like play of the game and enjoying it that way. I do kind of want to make like a building an account on Maplestory series because it's a really fun
Grinding.
game. You can play it on laptops, dude. Big Bang. Cygnus
Over the
Knights.
years, Maplestory has had some substantial updates to the game. The Cygnus Knights expansion gave players their first taste of rewarding alternate character progression.
Cygnus Knights were really interesting because when they were first released, they only went up to a level 120. They were a much easier class to play. The level cap at that point was level 200. They were a much easier class to play. Like, they were much more flashy. They had much more damage output. They had much more mobbing, but they were capped at a lower level, which for most people wasn't a big deal because you were never going to get to level 120 anyways. So it was definitely like a thing that would draw a lot of people in. I never really played Cygnus Knights because I was under the delusion that one day I would be a pro Maplestory player and would be really high level, so I just never did it.
As well as bringing in 5 brand new playable classes, Aran was the first hero class introduced to the game,
and then Evan,
which added a whole new element of gameplay completely different to the previously introduced classes. Evan and Dual Blade.
So the way that Aaron worked and its mechanics, so Aaron was this class that would build up combo counters. So as you fought a whole bunch of mobs on the screen, every time you would have successive hits, you would build up combo counters, and then you would spin those combo counters in order to use more powerful skills. They were a really fun class to play.
Followed shortly after, which showed off a completely new side of Maplestory's combat.
Pets.
Things became faster, flashier, and more satisfying, all leading up to something huge. The Big Bang update, which became a major turning point in Maplestory's history.
This is Maplestory's EOC. This is when, so I was, prior to Big Bang, like level 52 in Maplestory. And after Big Bang happened, my character went from level 52 to level 90 over the course of like a week and a half.
Everything was expanded upon. Quests became much more lucrative, whereas previously they all had questionable rewards. Combat got a facelift, changing how specific elements worked, and probably the most notable change was a much more approachable experience curve. Leveling was now much easier. More and more classes were added, more zones, more party quests, more events, as well as new features like
I often wonder what happened during Maplestory. I know I'm pausing the video a lot. I have a lot to say about Maplestory, apparently. I often wonder what happened to Maplestory to make them go in the pathway that they did in order to sort of progress the game the way that it has. Like, I wonder at what point they decided that party quests were out and grinding multiple characters was the thing, and that we were all going to sort of do this gameplay loop. Because the things that people remember super fondly in Maplestory were the party quests, were the hanging out with friends, doing all of that. I wonder if, because there was huge blocks of my life where I didn't play Maplestory. This is a game that took a lot of grinding and was very trying on your soul, especially as a young person. So I wonder what happened during those times that I wasn't around and how thriving the community actually was. I remember that there was a time in my life where I was very aware that Maplestory was sort of reaching its pinnacle because there were commercials for it on television where, people would be smacking each other in the face with fish, and they were like, and a girl would come up and she'd be like, "Why are you doing that?" And they'd be like, "'Cause it's free." And then she'd be like, "Why don't you just play Maplestory? It's free." And that was like their whole marketing campaign. I remember those commercials.
Crafting,
I was like,
and
I play that game.
A portion of the hardcore player base wasn't happy with this update though, as they felt it devalued their accomplishments by making the game easier. Some players felt like the once competitive hardcore aspect of the game had gotten lost over the years. Thankfully though, Nexon listened to this portion of the player base and did something to bring back that classic feeling with a modern flavour. The Reboot update. This introduced a progression server where everyone was essentially an Iron Man, which means no trading and no pay to win. This update was a massive success, and it's brought back a lot of hardcore players to the game that were previously unhappy with the Big Bang update. Recently, Maplestory introduced the 5th job advancement, as well as the ever-increasing level cap going from 200 all the way to 300 now. So yes, after all these years, Maplestory still has that feeling of a competitive grind. As of making this video, the highest level on NA and EU is someone called Monk, who's level 292. So
now someone's finally hit level 300. There was a person who was playing for 36 hours straight in order to hit level 300. They were in a race. It was a whole thing. It took it took multiple years for people to hit level cap again.
A metric crap ton of XP to go until 300. Additionally, MapleStory is more accessible nowadays
very
more than ever
streamed.
with it being released on Steam. MapleStory in 2022. The game's just had another revamp update, changing how the vanilla jobs play. Warriors, mages, archers, thieves, and pirates all have a much smoother gameplay experience with the recent update.
And that's another thing about this game is that as they add new characters and they start to figure out new ways of making their game fun to play, they go back and update the old characters as well. So you have this thing that happens that might sort of put some people off, but I think is a really good thing, where old classes become more and more accessible over and over and over again. And whatever you like, it will stay relevant no matter what, because they take time to go back and make the changes that are needed. And we're not talking about tweaks and rebalances. We're talking about entire new animations for skills, new skills being added in, you know, rebuffing of the classes, balancing and things. It's a lot of really cool stuff.
As well as the long-awaited player-owned housing system.
Yeah, you can make a house now.
MapleStory role players would have loved to have had this back in the day. Compared to its humble beginnings, MapleStory is a very different game now. Combat feels much faster than the slow pace it used to have. Everyone now has a double jump or teleport, and it's much easier to travel around the world compared to how it used to be. Every job has more impactful, satisfying abilities, so you can enjoy dealing big damage to cute mushroom creatures almost instantly.
That's another thing. There's so much customizability in MapleStory that people really take a lot of pride in it. Everything from your outfits to what's called your damage skins. So if you notice all those numbers that are going up over top of the monster's head every time you hit them, there's dozens of damage skins that change the way that looks, that are class appropriate, theme appropriate, all those things. And there's ones that have lightning all over them. There's ones that look like they're frozen. There's ones that are like flowers. I mean, there's just so much different stuff that you can get damage skin wise.
And quests have been streamlined so that each player can follow a more linear path when leveling up their characters, without the confusion of having to travel across the map for the next quest. If in doubt, the Maple Guide will lead you in the right direction. Party quests and dungeons can now be experienced with the click of a button rather than having to travel to the entrance. Dungeons also no longer have a level cap, which means your high-level Giga Chad friends can carry your dead ass whilst you're chilling in Discord.
Bro, you suck.
One of the biggest changes though is how progression works. It used to take a long ass time to get a character to a high level. Now, within a week or so of grinding, you can get to level 200 plus.
Yeah.
This doesn't mean that the hardcore grind doesn't still exist though, because at 200, XP to the next level increases exponentially.
Yeah.
Basically, what the devs have done here is make it easy for players to get to the point where they can experience the best stuff of what the game has to offer.
And there's sort of a sliding scale in MapleStory too. There's a whole thing that's happening where, like, over the years, the level that you actually get to, not easily, but the level that's considered to be like the base of the end game moves up as the max level cap moves up as well. When I was really playing MapleStory heavily in like 2021, that level was right around 230, and that's the highest level that I had ever gotten to, was like 234 on a character. And now it's more in the 250 range, so that's about where you can get to pretty easily. In fact, they've made it much simpler with XP boosts and things and level up boosts that now apply to characters post level 200. When I was playing, there's an event that happens called the Burning Event, in which every time you level up, you get 3 levels instead of just 1 level. So it boosts your levels really quickly and it can help you level up alts. And in fact, they even do what's called Burning Worlds, where your characters get that same boost from level 100 or 1 to level 150, and you can make up to 3 characters, and all the characters that you get to level 150, you can then transfer over to your main world whenever you're done with them. And there's just like so many different catch-up events that you can do. I suggest waiting for one of those and playing through the game with those to boost up a whole bunch of extra characters. Work on your first character, play the game normally on your first character, and then just get everything else through through Burning Events.
Whilst setting a new threshold for the hardcore grinders to compete in.
Totally.
Another benefit to this easier initial grind is that everyone can play multiple characters now without too much stress of a reroll. With so many classes added to the game, it would suck if players felt like they were locked into one class like the old days due to re-rolling being so painful. Other progression related changes, scrolling has been improved via the potential system, and there's also new things like hyperstats, hyper skills, achievements, legions, and familiars.
So much.
So if you're someone that hasn't played MapleStory for a while, but it's a game that you used to enjoy, then you'll definitely have fun checking out all the new stuff that's been added.
There's a type of person that I've noticed over the years who will not play a game that they used to play, and they always have all these complaints about like this is the moment that that game became terrible and that I stopped playing it. I think a lot of those people are just people who have read stuff on Reddit and sort of have this block in their mind where they can't go and actually experience something for themselves. And I don't relate to them at all because I'm the kind of person who, even if a game has changed dramatically, as long as the places and the music that I experienced when I was a kid are still there, I'm interested in at least trying it back out to see what happens. MapleStory is a game that I probably have some of the most hours in across all of the MMOs that I've ever played. I mean, I have 4,000 hours in MapleStory on Steam, which might even beat RuneScape at this point for my current characters and how much time I've put into them. That might not be true, but it's definitely a game that's worth checking out and still playing again if you haven't for a long time. Even if it's not the game that you remember, don't think to yourself that you have to play the game that you remember. Games change. That's what they do. Just imagine that you had played it this whole time. And there are a lot of people. Sushi is a person who has been playing this game forever, and they're still playing it. Dude, classic. King Slime was nuts. Dude, going back and forth on the buses or the trains and the boats. What's your MapleStory?
For many people, playing MapleStory is like checking in on an old childhood friend.
Totally.
Someone you grew up with. Every time you check in on them, some things are different, but it picks right back up where you left off, as if you never left. A comfortable, nostalgic feeling, almost like home. MapleStory to this day still has a solid player base, and I'm sure it's got big plans over the next year or so, approaching its 20th anniversary. So let's see what the future holds. As always, let me know your thoughts and favourite memories with MapleStory in the comments below, and click the link in the description below to return to the game and check out all the new stuff. Thanks for watching. Social media on screen.
Yeah, guys, obviously subscribe to Lazy Peon if you haven't already. If you like my channel, you'll definitely love Lazy Peon's channel. Give the video a like as well. MapleStory is a great game, and I'm kind of like starting to think about it more and more again. And I think I might make some content about it. So if you haven't played MapleStory yet, you should definitely give it a try. It's something that is different than all the other MMOs that you've played, and it's definitely worth your time. But that's the video for today, guys. I hope you enjoyed it, and thanks for watching, and be safe out there. Bye!